I'm sure as a Pokemon fan, you've heard various people talk about fan-made games and ROM hacks, and maybe even suggested you start playing them. But you'll soon realize just how many of them there are, and trying to find which one to start with might seem overwhelming. So I've compiled a list of 5 Pokemon fan games and ROM hacks that I believe will serve you the best experience as someone who's only played the official games, or someone who just hasn't played Pokemon in a very long time. They're all pretty different in their own ways, but have features and difficulty levels that make them friendly for new players. So I highly suggest you watch until the end of each segment to better understand which one is the best for you. And of course, they're all completed, because while I don't mind incomplete games myself, I do think the first one you play should be playable until the end. So without further ado, my name is Avery, and let's get started. Let's begin with a simple, yet very fun fan game, one that has a lot to offer, but not in a way that'll feel overwhelming. In Pokemon Neon Guardians, you'll play as a brand new Pokemon trainer ready to receive their first Pokemon, and travel across the region of Terre. You'll pick your initial partner from one of the first 4 generations of starters, and immediately are tasked with challenging 8 gym leaders across the region. Now, this game is absolutely jam-packed with interesting features. To start, every Pokemon has received some kind of buff, whether it be a stat increase, additional learn set options, or a new ability. This makes the familiar roster of Pokemon from the first 4 generations feel a lot wider, and those weaker Pokemon you'd never consider using now have a place in your team, whether it be as a permanent member or just something to help you win a difficult fight. And building a team of them will feel incredibly easy, with an abundance of mostly optional trainers and even one to grind at before every gym battle. But those balance changes would honestly feel pretty boring to play with if the game is too easy. But at the same time, you probably won't have fun if it's too hard either. Luckily, the game does offer 2 difficulty modes. On hard mode, important trainers will face you with Pokemon packed with coverage moves, and gym leaders will require you to fight them with as many Pokemon as they have. Additionally, you'll be locked to set mode, and have to comply with a hard level cap. But if that's not something you're a fan of, then don't worry, because the easy mode tosses all those restrictions out the door. And despite its name, it's not a complete walk in the park. You'll just be facing slightly lower level Pokemon, with a bit less coverage moves. I have to say that despite all of that, the region and story are a bit on the weaker side. The route design isn't bad, and the art style definitely isn't ugly, but I will criticize that a lot of the early routes definitely feel very similar. The story, however, is pretty identical to the older mainline games, in terms of its quality and depth. It's not a bad story, and it's definitely not one that'll get in your way, but it's not something I'd play the game for. Last but not least, what really helps give this game a spot on this list is all of these changes, features, and a full walkthrough available online, nicely organized into different categories on a single website. But most people might not want to play through a region and story very similar to the main series games, and might also not want to use just canon Pokemon. So let me introduce you to Pokemon Infinity, taking the number 4 spot as a game where you wake up in the region of Ego, with no memory of who you are or where you came from. So, of course, with nowhere else to go, you accept the starter Pokemon from the professor. Now, before we continue, you will have the choice between regional forms of the Kanto starters, but if you go upstairs, you'll find a computer, and after entering the password, you can input more to change your starter options, leaving you with over 100 different starter Pokemon choices, from canon Pokemon, to Fakemon, to regional variants, and even Digimon. After receiving whichever starter you pick, you'll then be tasked with traveling across the region to solve the mystery of your amnesia. The story is pretty good. It definitely has some interesting moments, and cutscenes didn't overstay their welcome. One of the things I was mainly playing for, though, was the exploration. On paper, the region might look very small, but in reality, there are a ton of different branching routes and side areas. that you'll find yourself stumbling upon throughout your adventure. The world is very pretty, and the art style mimics that of Generation 4's very well, but my favorite part of the game would have to be the 100 plus unique Fakemon and regional forms. And they're also paired with tons of new moves and unique battle animations for existing ones. So building a team of cool Pokemon will be very easy, especially with the EXP all you get after defeating the first gym leader. Finally, at the same computer I mentioned before, you can toggle a plethora of different challenge options, from a forced level cap to a permadeath mode, randomizer options, and much more. Pokemon Infinity is a great game to start your fan game journey with, and if you happen to play it, I highly suggest checking out the full wiki as well, to learn more about the Fakemon, regional forms, or just the game in general. Before we continue, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed, because once you're done with whatever game you play first, I'm sure you're going to be looking for more. And I cover tons of them every month. So make sure you subscribe to never miss out on any Pokemon fan game or ROM hack. Alright, so I'm going to be going through the number 2 and 3 spots a bit quicker. And the reason for that is because while they are both really good for new players, they are incredibly popular and have been talked about hundreds of times already. The first one is Pokemon Gaia. It takes place in a brand new region with a new story. And I say that with quotation marks because while it is a new story with new characters, it feels very much like something Game Freak would have created themselves back in the day. But that's kind of why it belongs here, because while I think the magic of fan projects comes from creating more unique stories, generic ones aren't a bad place to start. The hack features Pokemon from the first 6 generations, as well as a handful of modern features, like the physical special split, movesets updated from the 6th generation, and the fairy type. It does lack the modern EXP share system, but that wasn't really a problem due to the very well balanced level curve and honestly overall lack of much difficulty. It's a very well made hack, but don't go into it expecting a story or adventure experience much different from the Generation 3 or 4 games. Next is Pokemon Unbound. It's pretty similar to Gaia in terms of story depth, although there are much more cutscenes and involvement, it's still something you'd expect from Game Freak. However, there are a lot more gameplay features and quality of life systems. You'll start the game with access to 4 different difficulty modes, randomizer options, and a sandbox mode, which basically just gives you everything you want, and the ability to modify your Pokemon in any legal way. The region is very sizable, with plenty of different towns, routes, forests, and mountains to explore. And you'll have access to Pokemon from the first 7 generations to build your team out of, with both the EXP All and DexNav making it incredibly easy to build a full team. So if you don't have a device that runs fan games, or would just prefer to start with a ROM hack, definitely pick one of these 2. And finally, at number 1 is one of my personal favorites. A game that I think has something for almost every Pokemon fan. This is Pokemon Real Idea System, and you might be wondering what makes it so special. Of course, it does have a new region, but it's not one that was thrown together just for fun, or without much thought going into it. The region of Esoteria is an absolutely beautiful place, put together with a fully custom Generation 5 tile set that fits the 2D landscape perfectly. Every corner of every town, route, cave, forest, you name it, has something interesting to do or pretty to look at. And you'll never get bored exploring, because while you do start in a grassy green area, you'll quickly find yourself on a snowy hillside, bustling city, or even a village inside of a mountain. But pretty maps isn't the only thing this game has to offer. No, we're just getting started. The story is really good. It starts off simple, following a trainer who just wants to explore the region and collect 8 gym badges. But you'll soon find yourself wrapped up in a plot about a mysterious machine that can forcefully create bonds with people and Pokemon. You'll meet many different characters, from evil team leaders in favor of this machine, to professors and rivals joining you in preventing its development. But of course, this is still a Pokemon game, and thankfully that side of it is also really good. You'll begin your journey choosing one of 3 Fakemon starters, and if you aren't a fan of them, then you'll also have Pokemon from the first 7 generations to build your team out of. and they're spread out in a way where you'll have almost no trouble building a full team of them very quickly. I chose the Nuzlocke this run of the game, and it was honestly really fun, but that's also thanks to just how perfect the difficulty is, as battles felt just slightly more difficult than those in the mainline games. So playing normally, you probably won't struggle whatsoever, but turn on set mode and play with permadeath rules, and you're in for a very fun experience. Overall, I think Real Idea System is the perfect game to begin your journey through the world of Pokemon fan projects. Or if you're just someone who hasn't played them in a while. The main story is about 30 hours long, and even has a post-game with around 10 hours of extra content. So even if you're already a big fan game player, please, go and play it. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments talking about games people think are better than the ones I included on this list. But I promise that as someone who's played hundreds of them, I seriously believe that these are the 5 best ones to pick from as your first. Many of the other games I find people often suggesting are either too long, too hard, too slow, or just outdated. That doesn't mean any of them are bad, or not worth playing eventually, but I don't want to give someone something that leaves a bad taste in their mouth, or gives them a negative outlook on the scene as a whole. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a nice rest of your day.